This is Upwell, a new podcast from Only.one, featuring entrepreneurs, advocates, and leaders working to protect and restore the ocean and the planet. And I'm your host, Aaron Kinnery. Today we have Daniela Fernandez, the founder and CEO of the Sustainable Ocean Alliance, who is activating the next generation of champions to restore the health of the ocean. Let's dive in. Daniela, I'm so excited to have you as our first guest ever on Upwell, and I was keen to have you kick off this series because you're embracing the exact multifaceted and multi-sector approach that I think is critical to restoring the ocean and healing the planet. So I'm looking forward to exploring that further. But first, let's start from the beginning. You're from Ecuador, which of course is home to the Galapagos and incredible natural habitats. Is that where your love for the ocean and planet was initially sparked?
Absolutely. I always think back to my childhood days in Ecuador. I remember loving going to the ocean. I remember being such a happy kid in the mountains, going to the Amazon rainforest, and simply being one with nature was what inspired me to continue my journey of saving the planet. But what was really interesting to me was that as a child, you think that all of this is the norm. You think that having biodiversity and having birds and having, so much fauna around you is like what it is. But then I ended up moving to Chicago when I was 7. And to my surprise, I ended up going from an actual jungle to a concrete jungle in Chicago, which led me to realize that the entire world wasn't made up of biodiversity and the Amazon and the Galapagos Islands. But with that being said, I do know that my love for nature and for the environment came from my roots in Ecuador.
That's great. And so one day you're in Chicago and you're walking down the street and you see a movie poster with penguins, which I know you love. But that movie doesn't quite turn out to be the hopeful story you thought, right? What was the film?
No, so the film was An Inconvenient Truth by Al Gore. And I actually just watched the sequel. I rewatched it, I should say. And I would encourage everyone to rewatch it, especially as we're nearing the COP27 negotiations. And so I went to pick up this film about penguins. And the next thing you know, I'm watching Al Gore talk about climate change, talk about floods, talk about literally the disaster that we're nearing. And as a 12-year-old kid, I just sat there in awe with my jaw dropped. And I asked myself, how is this possible? And most importantly, I also asked myself, what am I going to do about it? And how can I play a role in helping to save our planet? And so I honestly took on that responsibility as a kid in realizing that our planet, our survival is really in our hands. And I had to do something about what I just had learned after watching that film.
It's incredible that you felt that at such an early age. And so then you went on later to attend Georgetown. And then as a student in 2014, you launched the Sustainable Ocean Alliance. What inspired you to start SOA?
I had this catalytic aha moment when I was invited by Georgetown to a meeting at the UN. And at this meeting, I found myself surrounded by amazing leaders, scientists, CEOs, ambassadors, heads of state. And as you can imagine, I was 19. I knew a lot about the climate crisis. I had, high aspirations and dreams, but I also was there to receive guidance and to receive some sort of plan from the world leaders that I was coming to see. And what was fascinating to me and also terrifying was the fact that every single person that spoke at that meeting at the UN came up and talked about the problems. They gave us the terrifying statistics of by 2050, we're going to have more plastic than fish in the ocean by weight. They talked about the biodiversity loss. They talked about sea level rise. And as I was sitting there listening to all these facts, I kept waiting for someone to go up and say, and this is how we're going to solve it. But that moment never came. Not one person spoke about solutions. Not one person spoke about entrepreneurship, about people coming up with ideas and being innovative and being inventors of our time. And so I left that meeting completely disillusioned and frankly terrified, because if the people at that UN meeting did not have a plan, what were we supposed to do? What hope did my generation have? And the other takeaway that I came away with is the fact that I was the only young person in that room. There was no sort of Twitter feed, YouTube feed, like live action that was streaming back to us, to the people outside those closed doors at the UN. And so I wanted to change that accessibility. I wanted to make this information, this knowledge accessible to everyone, and more importantly, to young people, because it is us that are inheriting this planet. And so that was the catalytic moment for me, where I realized that, one, we need solutions for our ocean and planet. And two, we also need to support young people and empower them to not only have ideas, but actually to help them bring them to life.
That's great. So what's the mission of SOA?
So our mission is to invest in people and solutions that can help save our planet and restore the ocean in our lifetime. That is a very ambitious goal. And even as I say it, I know it is, but the reality is that we don't have another option. If we don't set ambitious risk-setting targets and goals in our lifetime, I don't think that we're ever going to reach them. And our generation is the last generation that has a capability, that has a timeline, and that has the resources and intelligence and funding to make this happen. So I'm very hopeful. I wake up every morning excited to do my job, because I hear from youth on the ground. I listen to entrepreneurs coming up with an amazing solutions and technologies. The question just is, how can we help them accelerate that technology so that it can enter the market quickly? How can we help disrupt existing industries that are damaging our environment, and how can we replace them, or just change our business model so that they're not harming our planet, but rather helping regenerate our ecosystems?
And over time, you've helped support over 220 solutions to heal, restore, and sustain the ocean. And one of the key parts of your program is this accelerator program, where you have 45 startups that have gone through this and you've helped catalyze an additional raise of another 225 million for these startups. Do you want to talk about how your accelerator program has been supporting these entrepreneurs in the network?
Absolutely. So I'll give you some background as to why we decided to build an accelerator in the ocean space. So when I was still in college, I was receiving a lot of inquiries from young people. And they said, Daniela, I have this amazing business idea to help the planet, to help the ocean, but I don't know who can help me. I don't know where to go. And so I realized that there wasn't one platform that could connect these entrepreneurs to mentors, connect them to funders, give them more education about how it is that you start a business, how it is that you actually launch a potential unicorn, or as we like to call them, the narwhals of the ocean, potential billion-dollar company. And so I looked at Silicon Valley. While I was still in DC, I realized that I could potentially move out to Silicon Valley and take that ingenuity, the human capital, the resources that we have been providing for tech companies, and instead channel that to companies that will help sustain our planet. And so I moved to Silicon Valley with this idea of starting an accelerator program for the ocean. And that's when I met one of my colleagues, Craig Dudenhofer, who at the time was working in tech in the space. And so we partnered up and we built the first ocean accelerator program in the history of, I would say, of the ocean space. And it's been so amazing to see how many companies have gone through our program, and the support they need is so specific. It's so specific to where they are on their journey, whether it is needing a seaweed advisor, or if they need a pitch coach, or if they need to attend a UN meeting to talk to governments about piloting their technologies. So that's what we support these companies with. And one exciting announcement that I will share here is that we are changing our model from an accelerator program to an ecopreneur network. Which means that we're opening up our doors to many more entrepreneurs that will receive concierge-like support from us. And instead of having a time-bound program like traditional accelerators, we're actually going to enable these entrepreneurs to have a membership-based model, so they can enter our ecosystem, receive the help they need when they need it, and we can meet them where they are.
I love that. What are some of the common challenges that you've seen some of these entrepreneurs face?
I would say, well, there's so many. Let me give you the three categories. The first category is funding. So we have a lot of funding in the space when it comes to challenge grant. We have some grant funding that scientists, receive to do more research. But the problem that we see is that there's a big gap of funding after seed. So once you have your seed investment, you can build your prototype, you can share it with the world, but then how do you scale? And so we're seeing a lot of entrepreneurs not having access to lead investors that can take their product and help them, lead a series A or Series B around. And so that's what we call the valley of death. When you have, a proof of concept, you might have a product even in the water, but the problem is how can you get that to market? How can you get more people to access your product? And that's been a really big challenge, which is why part of my role now is to incentivize and educate investors in pension funds and large capital markets to understand that the ocean and planet space, it's not philanthropic capital we're looking for. We're looking for-profit capital that can in fact receive a profitable return down the line. And that's been something that has been very challenging, but I think that the world is finally understanding that in the next few years, it's going to be a revolution. And the only companies that are going to win are the companies that are not harming our planet, are the companies that are actually going to change their business model, not to greenwash or blue wash, but because they have the right intentions and they have the stakeholder of the planet on their mind. So that's one challenge that I would say. And the second one I would say also is around finding talent. And one of my beliefs is that we also need a talent revolution, in that there are so many people out there that don't necessarily have an idea or have a solution for the ocean or planet, but they have their talent, they have their skill. They might be an accounting executive, they might be in marketing, they might be an artist. And so we need those skill sets to be applied to the planet and our ocean entrepreneurs. So I would say that those are the big two challenges that we're seeing in the space. And the third one I'll also mention is the lack of education that governments have in understanding these technologies. So to give you an example, we have one of our companies, CalWave. They're an incredible company based out of Berkeley, and they have been looking for a space to actually pilot their wave buoys. And it's incredible because these buoys can produce electricity by the movement of waves. And how more sustainable can you get than having wave energy? But the problem they're facing is that a lot of governments don't understand what it will take to put these technologies in the water. And so one of the challenges that we're helping them with is educating governments and giving them the accessibility to have pilot projects within these different countries.
And so you mentioned one of the entrepreneurs that's working on renewable energy in the ocean, and I know you have quite a few doing some work in food systems and as well as waste management and new materials. Did you want to highlight a few of the other entrepreneurs that have come through the network?
Yeah, happy to. And I can't say I could ever have a favorite one because they all feel like my babies. But I'll give you some that come to mind right away. One of them is Planet Care. And what Planet Care is doing is that they devised a machine washing filter that can catch up to 90% of microfibers. And what most people don't know is that you're actually polluting the ocean just by washing your clothes. It's not intentional, but the reality is that the infrastructure through which we consume, which we wear our clothes, is actually damaging our planet. So this amazing entrepreneur, she found a way to actually build this filter so that you can install your filter in your house, and that can prevent you from damaging the ocean. So that's one really exciting company that I love. Another company is called Ocean Works. What they're doing is they built a marketplace so you can source and also give access to upcycled and recycled plastic that's coming from the ocean, which is a really cool way to combine both the demand that we now have for upcycled material, but also the supply of people picking up this ocean waste and not knowing where it needs to go. So that's another exciting company. And the last one I'll share with you is Dispatch Goods. I also love the concept because, especially during the pandemic, a lot of us order food to our house. And I'm sure that everyone experienced, opening up and you have, one packet of plastic, you have your silverware out of plastic, you have the container out of plastic. And so what Dispatch Goods has figured out is how to do zero waste deliveries. So they actually have an amazing pilot with DoorDash in San Francisco, and they can deliver your containers in reusable containers that can be then returned to DoorDash so they can be returned to the restaurant. So I think just having amazing solutions that, again, are re-engineering the way that we operate as humans is what we desperately need so we can make an advancement in the climate crisis.
And another big piece of the climate crisis is fixing food systems. And, the ocean provides sustenance to so many. I know you have a couple food-based entrepreneurs that have come through the network as well. Did you want to highlight a few of those?
Yes, we do have a few of them. One of them is Akua. Akua, they're creating kelp-based burgers. They even have their newest product is crab cakes, but they're still based out of kelp. And what's amazing about Akua is that not only are they providing people an alternative to meat, and, especially as more people are becoming plant-based, but the fact that kelp is being grown in the ocean, it's absorbing carbon. So I like to think about it as a double impact, right? You are reducing carbon from the atmosphere while also giving people an alternative option to feed themselves. And I think that's really cool. And the other one that I'll mention too is Finless Foods. Finless Foods is replacing the marketplace by growing their cell-based fish. And they're starting with plant-based and moving to cell-based. But the idea is instead of catching the fish in the ocean, how can we replace the way that we grow fish in a way that's more sustainable?
Well, in addition to the Accelerator program, you also have this fantastic leadership program where you've supported about 6,000 leaders across 165 countries. How does SOA help these young leaders?
Well, I like to think back to my days as a 19-year-old kid when I had this idea of starting the Sustainable Ocean Alliance, but I didn't have any sort of guidance, any sort of support or mentorship that was provided to me. And that's the basis of the leadership program. We wanted to build a program that could provide immediate access to resources, access to mentorship, access to education to any young person that might have an idea of how to solve a project, in their own backyard. And so just to give you an example, we have projects that are planting mangroves in their communities. We have young leaders that are also looking to protect sea turtles. We have one of our youth leaders, 4B Percy. He's our regional rep from Africa, and he's on this plastic man also in his region because he's educating people about plastic waste. So it's like, how can we give back the power to youth and help them communicate and be the translators in their own communities as to the importance of protecting our planet. And I think that a lot of folks take that for granted, the importance of grassroots movements and grassroots projects. And so we've been supporting these grassroots projects through microgrants. So give them access to capital, access to education, and access to exposure to make sure that people also know about the projects that are happening.
I love that. And with this, you also recently launched the Climate Resilient Fisheries Fellowship with the Environmental Defense Fund. What will that work focus on?
Yeah, well, part of the problem that we see in the environmental space and the ocean space is that lack of education. We have so many youth leaders coming from developing nations, from island nations, and they simply don't have the access to the education that we might find in more developed countries. So we are bridging that gap by providing training, by providing sustainability fellowships, and again access to capital and from $1,000 to $10,000, it may not seem a lot to us, but it means a whole lot when you're talking about planting a seedling in a mangrove or empowering an entire community to think about their sustainability practices when feeding a whole village. And so the idea there is to provide that accessibility of education to our youth leaders. And something else we're considering at SOA is providing language education for a lot of youth leaders, because when you go to high-level conferences like the UN or COP, a lot of the conversations are in English, and youth leaders might have a badge to enter, but they may not have the language to actually present their ideas. So we're also thinking about how can we provide that supplemental education to these youth leaders that might be brilliant in their own language, but can't necessarily make that translation happen.
So great. And another big area of your work is advocacy, and you've helped to spearhead many campaigns to help protect and restore the ocean. One that we've been lucky to work with you on with Only.one and with the Oxygen Project is this moratorium on deep sea mining. Do you want to talk about that campaign and why it's so critical for folks to pay attention to this?
Well, we are running out of time, I would say, in putting a stop to governments providing commercial licenses to mine our deep sea. And it's been so exciting to be working with Only One on this campaign. And our campaign is to reach 100,000 signatures to have this moratorium on deep sea bed mining by COP. So we have about a month, about a month to go. So for those of you listening, please, please, please sign our petition. And most importantly, I would say, become educated about what's happening with our deep sea. My fear is that there are so many advancements happening in the restoration of our ocean. There are, so many amazing NGOs in the space working to protect marine areas. We're working to restore mangroves and coral reefs, but at the same time, it blows my mind that we're talking about literally putting a nuclear level bomb in our ocean. And that would be a setback to all the work that we are doing as a collective, as a organizational, in a community, in the non-for-profit space. And so our generation should not be having to fight governments to protect this, area that we don't even know about. We have more data and more information about outer space than we do about the ocean, and it's more accessible to us. It's right here in our backyards, and it's cheaper to have more information about the ocean than it is from outer space. So, I give that context because there are so many benefits that our deep sea provides us. For example, we study it for medicine, right? We study it for to understand our ecosystem better. And how can we do that if we're exploiting and literally exploding those minerals that are coming from the deep sea? So it's something that's really important to us, and it's something that we've done a survey, and 92% of youth support a moratorium on deep sea bed mining. And I would imagine that those numbers are similar with an adult population, especially now that people are becoming more conscious of our own survival being tied to to our ocean and our planet. So that's something that I wanted to flag.
Well, thank you. And I'll be sure to, in the show notes, to include a link to the campaign and some more background resources for folks to learn more about deep sea mining. Because as you mentioned, we're running out of time, and it's pretty critical that folks get involved. You're working across so many areas and in so many communities around the world. How do you organize your team, and how do you decide what to tackle and when?
I would say that our priority always lies on the fastest and most ambitious and radical way for us to create change. And the priorities change over time. Sometimes our focus is on deep sea bed mining. Right now, our focus is on COP27. The world is looking at the 1.5 degrees Celsius as to what they should be meeting during these negotiations. But the reality is that 1.5 is not good enough for our generation. And it should not be good enough for our generation. Because if you look at the IPCC report and if you read it in detail, which again, I recommend everyone reads in detail, we are accepting 18% biodiversity loss at 1.5 degrees Celsius. We are accepting over 70% of coral reef death. We're accepting millions of people dying from sea level rise, from catastrophic fires. And as I'm reading this report, I'm asking myself, how is it that we're allowing another generation to accept those consequences for us? As you can hear, I'm really passionate about this, and I'm really, it's deeply seated in my heart and soul right now, because we cannot accept those consequences. We should be setting even more ambitious targets, and we cannot allow corporations and governments to build plans toward that target if we don't agree with those consequences. And so right now, one of our priorities as an organization is to figure out what's the narrative that's happening at COP. How can we help truly bring the next generation voice to the table, and not simply accept what other generations are framing for us, because it is our future. So I think, to answer your question, it's very much time sensitive, depending on what's happening in the world, but also hearing from our community and listening to the needs of our entrepreneurs, listening to the needs of our community, and seeing what they're struggling with and where can we show up.
That's great. And as we discussed, so you launched Sustainable Ocean Alliance when you were in college, and you clearly have incredible passion, and you've been able to rally young people all around the world in support of this cause. What advice would you give young entrepreneurs and activists who want to get more involved?
The first piece of advice I would say is embrace uncertainty. And that's a piece of advice one of my mentors gave me early on in my journey, because you never know what's going to happen. You don't know whether you're going to fail or succeed in your idea, but it's part of the journey. And as you go through your journey of having this idea or building it out, you have to be fearless as well. And it doesn't mean that you're afraid that you're not afraid. It means that you're accepting the consequences of fear, but yet you still have the courage to do something that's bigger than yourself. And I think those two ideals of having the courage of cutting through the weeds and breaking down barriers as they came up, and also embracing the uncertainty of what will happen in our future, but still having the passion and commitment towards acting is what helped me stay strong on this journey through the past few years. And I think that a lot of people need to be reminded of that, because it's not easy. It's not easy being in this space. It can be saddening. It can be depressing. It can be lead to climate anxiety. I think we all feel it as we hear the news, but it's up to us. And that's what I always center myself. And I don't want to have any regrets at the end of my life, and think back that I didn't do what was in my possibility to make a change in this world. And I hope that everyone listening puts that same question to themselves. What can you do in the realm of your own possibilities? What passion do you have? What talents, what skill sets? You can contribute. The question just is how. And I would encourage all of you to ask yourself that question and find a way to join us on this journey.
And what are some ways that people can get involved and support this work?
Yeah, specifically with SOA, we're always looking for mentors. So if you have a specific expertise, feel free to reach out and become a mentor to support our entrepreneurs or our youth leaders. If you are an entrepreneur or a youth leader and you want to be a part of our ecosystem, also reach out. We're opening up applications for our Ecopreneur Network in November after COP, so be on the lookout for that. And we're also launching an online community for people that are just passionate to help the ocean. And so we'll be launching that next year. So also be on the lookout for that. So a lot of amazing things happening at SOA, and I'm really happy about our partnership too with Only.one as we just, bring more awareness to our ocean and planet.
Thank you. Well, I will be sure to include links to all of those in the show notes as well so that folks can access those. Any closing thoughts, reasons for optimism? I will say that, folks often ask me, am I optimistic about the future? And I do think we have to be optimistic, particularly our generation. It's the only option we have, but we have to get to work at the same time. And I'm often left feeling inspired and optimistic after talking to young leaders like you who have inspired another generation of people to get involved. So I just wanted to ask you, what inspires you and what leaves you optimistic for the future?
Thanks, Aaron. I would say that my commitment and the commitment that I see across the board from entrepreneurs, from policymakers, from scientists, it's what keeps me optimistic. It's the fact that it is our own responsibility and calling that we have to follow as we make decisions in our life. And I see that there's so many people that are committed to this, that are relentless in fighting this fight. And that's what keeps me going, because I know that I'm not alone. I know that I'm not the young kid sitting at this meeting at the UN, looking around, being scared to death about the consequences, but I rather have a community. We have our tribe that we built, over the past few years, and we're in it together. And so I think that's what keeps me inspired, and seeing the solutions and seeing the light in the eyes of our entrepreneurs, and seeing how determined they are to make a change. It's, I think, what should give us all some hope.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Well, again, you give me hope, and I'm super excited to be working with you, and so grateful that you took the time today to share your work and to be our very first guest. So I really appreciate it, Daniela.
Thank you, Aaron. Have a good one.
Thank you. You too. Thank you so much, Daniela, for sharing incredible insights and optimism, and for being our first ever guest on Upwell. I'll leave links to where you can find Daniela and the Sustainable Ocean Alliance, as well as the campaign to stop deep sea mining in the show notes, which you can find at only.one/Upwell. Once again, that's only.one/Upwell. This week's episode was engineered by Jake Bowles, and our cover art was designed by Joanna Marcus at Only.one. Make sure you subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts, and start your journey to help save the ocean and fix the climate today at only.one. For as little as $9, you can start planting coral and mangroves and removing plastics and carbon. Again, that's www.only.one. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll be back next week with an all-new episode of Upwell.